It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. It's Feedback Friday. And hey guys. I did the sparkle on the face because it's rainy, it's snowy, and dreary, and I'm really freaking tired because I'm still dealing with seasonal affective disorder, and some days it's like can't get to sleep. Some days it's wanna sleep forever. Other days it's like after 3 hours, eyes pop open, brain goes, let's party. And today was one of these days, so I'm really starting to feel it right now. So I did all the fancy makeup, trying to make myself feel a little bit better. You know, if you don't feel good, try to look good, lift the mood. But then I was so tired after doing all this sparkle play that I put on this elfie tunic type thing. And then it's like, I don't really feel like putting on pants. So it is a pants-free Friday. Pants-free Friday. Now, listen, YouTube censors, before you go freaking out on me. There's no nakeds here. Okay. My butt is strategically covered. See, the tunic is just long enough. I just normally wear stuff underneath it, and wearing no pants is funny. It's rather freeing. It's like, no pants. Yeah, this will be relevant. That will be relevant. But first, I did promise that I was going to talk about the whole Patreon Sargon controversy. And I will get that. I want to get to the people's feedback from the actual videos this week. And because that's only fair. It was one of those weeks where I really didn't know what to expect. I was hoping that it would be well received, as I always do, but I could see why people could possibly get upset about it. Fortunately, it was pretty well received, considering the contentiousness of the various topics. It didn't get demonetized. Yay. I find that if you focus stuff on a particular person instead of a topic, it doesn't get demonetized unless it's a Simpsons character. But I don't like that because that encourages personal attacks instead of discussion of a subject, but those are YouTube's rules. We have to play with them. A lot of people gave me crap for not recognizing Jason Momoa's Stargate Atlantis costume. The article itself that I was paraphrasing didn't recognize it, and I have seen all of 4 episodes of Stargate Atlantis because it employed some people I like very much. So yeah, I didn't recognize it. I had no idea that was a Stargate Atlantis costume. There you go. But mostly people were like, thank you for acknowledging double standards and all that good stuff. The dialogue on the Kevin Hart Oscars thing, I think some people were possibly afraid to comment on it, but the people who did were mostly in agreement with me. Some people thought he should have stuck by his guns, but that's a personal decision, right? It's, all in all, that went fairly well. And things like this, the issues surrounding the whole Kevin Hart mess are things I believe do need more discussion in a way that people from different affected groups can actually speak and not just be shouted down and not be shamed or no platformed, because these things are complicated, and a lot of people, no, they're not. It's like, yeah, they are complicated in terms of the impact of colonialism on Afro-Caribbean hang-ups about certain things. I'm being very careful, again, because you guys know that of all the things I am really uncomfortable talking about on YouTube, race is a big one because, white is a ghost. And when I first started doing stuff, on the internet, I thought, hey, I grew up in a minority majority neighborhood. There were more people of color than white people in my high school. And so I have a better handle on this kind of stuff than most white people. But a lot of people still get really mad when any white person tries to talk about race. And I know that's a pitfall. I would love to create a format where I could just, interview people of color about, the things they like in their projects and everything like that. One of the complaints I got when I did a documentary on hip hop music was Black artists were saying that, you guys always know our number when you want us to talk about being Black, but then you don't promote our music. And I thought that was a totally fair criticism. It drives me crazy. And so I get really frustrated that it's not that we're not past this, but that we seem not to be making a ton of progress in terms of common understanding of late. Nobody's listening to each other. And that sort of segues into the thing I did on the Israeli domestic violence women's protest. And I was quite happy to see some people, thank me for pointing out that domestic violence is not just something men do to women. It's something women do to men, and men do to men, and women do to women. And people of some other gender or no gender do to, various types of people, including, and of course, rates of violence against trans people are sky high. It's something like 1 in 2 trans women will be assaulted in their lifetimes. So that's a scary high statistic. I do think that the issue of violence in general, but, domestic violence, it is harmed by making it a women's issue. Because the same way, I'm uncomfortable talking about race because I'm not a racial minority. Men feel very uncomfortable getting actively involved in things that are perceived as women's causes for a myriad of reasons. And I think that it's also, this perpetuation of the idea that women are kind and men are strong, that benevolently sexist dichotomy, the idea that, there's something, and I'm going to express this badly, and I apologize in advance. There's something in the way domestic violence is discussed that continues to perpetuate the idea that women are just inherently the weaker sex, instead of really drilling down on the fact that a lot of domestic abuse, both mental, emotional, and physical, it's less about who is bigger or stronger and more about who has either financial leverage or some sort of, there's a power imbalance somehow, and we have this very reductive view of it. Oh, men are bigger. This idea that women can't really hurt men because they're physically stronger. It's easier for a man to restrain a woman. This, as somebody who's been in these situations, not to get too into that, the problem is that when someone gets aggressive in that way, gets violent in close quarters, what most people do, men and women alike, is freeze. I learned this from a cop friend. It's not really fight or flight, it's freeze, fight, or flight. And so a lot of people freeze, and it doesn't matter how big or how strong you are. Um, you know, you freeze up in those moments, and because you're frozen, people can really violate your physical, emotional, and mental boundaries, and that is not right. And it's a complex issue. I've had some really real talk offline discussions on this topic that need to happen. I learned a lot from them, even if I walked away feeling, more than a little unnerved about some of the dynamics involved. But I think that because domestic violence is seen as a woman's problem, and in Israel it might very well be. It sounds like there's a more sort of traditionalist gender binary at play there. But on the broader point, I do think our numbers are skewed. I think our understanding of the issue is skewed, and that's not helping anyone. It's hurting women because this idea women are default victims, which nobody follows a victim into battle. Nobody follows a victim up a hill. You can't be a victim and a leader at the same time. And then there's the thing where, because men are so afraid of being seen as girly, doing anything female sphere or effeminate, that they suffer in silence. They hide what happens to them, and there's this real source of shame, because this idea that you're a victim of domestic violence, that something happens to women, that's a problem. And I feel very strongly that that's hurting everyone. And then trans people who take so much crap because people don't understand what's going on. Science doesn't even completely understand what's going on with transgender people yet. We're kind of stuck treating it as a mental illness, when it could very well be a malfunctioning endocrine system or who knows what. And the reason that's important is because if it's, an adrenal, if it's an endocrine, it's not adrenal, but a hormonal thing, somebody's body produced the wrong hormones and produced a wrong result, that actually is a physical illness. And then it makes sense that you correct the physical to correct a physical illness, instead of this weird anomaly status it has in mental illness. And because there's this lack of understanding of a lack of normalization of trans people, then they fall through the cracks because people are so busy fighting about the very existence of trans people, that people who are in bad situations, who are marginalized to the point of having to live in insecure and unsafe situations, it's very hard for them to get out of it, right? Because just the simple fact that the domestic battery, the shelters for people who have to flee a difficult situation are primarily women's shelters. There are a lot fewer men's shelters in women's shelters. I found out that the hard way when we were trying to find a placement for a male friend of mine. There were no beds. There was no space, because there's one men's shelter in the Toronto area. And the fact that we even have one is better than most cities, but there just aren't resources. And because it's a numbers game, because the perception is so many more women are battered than men, there's all these resources allocated to battered women, and then a men's shelter too. But then trans people, especially trans women, get caught because some women's shelters won't take trans women, because of this idea that it's going to make the other women there uncomfortable. And that is a real problem because funding for these sorts of initiatives are a numbers game, and there are so few trans people as percentage of the population. It's really hard to get numbers that rise to the level of, a politician's going to get enough votes to make this initiative possible. That's the arithmetic of pain of this whole thing, and it sucks and it's frustrating. And so at least we can have a frank discussion about that without these artificial gender labels, especially in gaming, because we tend to be not sex typical. And so I really think that a lot of guys in gaming have are more likely to have been on the receiving end of various types of violence, either from a parent or from a significant other than the general population. And I think that, female gamers, we take it from both sides in terms of the gender binary as well, because we tend to be atypical. And yet we keep hearing all these things of what women want. Well, we're that 25% of the population that isn't sex typical. What women want doesn't apply to us precisely because we aren't typical. What men want doesn't apply because the guys in gaming, to me, it's all positives the way gamers differ from, typical men. You guys tend to be, I have found when you're given permission, when you're given a safe space to do it, sorry about the term, but you are more in touch with your emotions. You're better at naming your feelings. These are all extremely positive. And unfortunately, I think part of the reason that male gamers are more in touch with their feelings is they've had to be, because they've had to process some really tough stuff. Because of, we call it bullying, but it's abuse. When someone commits violence against you, and you didn't agree to, be in a boxing or MMA bout, that's abuse. Bullying, I think, it sounds like a softer word, and so we don't really name it for what it is. Bullying is more like picking on a kid. You smell and all this stuff. I used to get told I was going to hell because I had spotted skin. Because apparently somebody in an evangelical church in the neighborhood did a thing about spotted skin as the mark of the beast. And these kids came to school and decided to inform me of this. That's great. And that sort of, those, I guess, bigotry. Yeah, that church was spreading bigotry. And this is not, I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying this is true of all evangelical churches. Some of the most dearest friends I have on this planet are an evangelical pastor, youth pastor, and his wife. This is just this particular church. But that brings us into this whole Patreon thing. It's been a wild ride for me because a bunch of people dropped all their Patreon support, including mine, in response to Sargon of Akkad getting kicked off Patreon because of the perception that Patreon made a political decision and was removing people from the service based on, perceived politics and all these free speech arguments and this, that, and the next thing. And it couldn't have come at a worse time for me. Moving is extremely expensive. Some patrons did prop up. They boosted their support to help cover the shortfall, and I'm really appreciative of it. The patrons are going to get a more detailed explanation of certain things that I cannot talk about regarding this in public for very good reasons, and I'll get to those. Parts of this are going to be really difficult because explaining the reason is sometimes even saying too much, which sucks, but I gotta be really careful here. I took some time to think about this. I actually recorded this video like 3 different times, 3 different ways, because my my understanding and my opinions of the whole situation kept changing and evolving, and more information became available to me. And I'm left kind of with a short-term conundrum and then a longer-term conundrum. And, let's start with the details. Sargon of Akkad was apparently kicked off Patreon this week. And the reasons why are somewhat murky. The best, and I do not claim this is great, but it's the most reliable source. Unfortunately, if you Google this issue right now, and this is really ironic based on the accusations against Google this week, but the top hits on like Sargon Patreon get you stuff like the Daily Stormer website with an article that is, I don't even understand what they were talking about in half of it. Obviously, I don't read the Daily Stormer on the regular. So the best, if still not great, source I could find was this Vice News article that unfortunately they buried it. The first half of the article is about Milo, and it's like, my God, you're still beating that horse. But it says here that Sargon of Akkad was removed for his violation of hate speech in our guidelines after using racial and homophobic slurs to degrade another individual. And then they say, they link this to Yiannopoulos, who violated content guidelines with the association in support of violent organizations, as was Allsup. And then they bring up Gab, a free speech social network favored by the right-wing community, has also been cut off by payment processors. Now, the problem with this article, the reason I'm like, yeah, and I put this on Twitter as well, that the headline is crowdfunding site Patreon is purging far-right figures. This is this is something Vice has come to. Patreon has not announced that they're purging far-right figures. I don't think this is helpful. I think it's actually the accurate story, and this is why, someone can report the facts accurately and then twist them with wording to create a perception that is inaccurate. And this drives me crazy about reporting. The correct headline would be Patreon removes popular personalities for terms of service violations. That's really all this is. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with their political slant. It has to, the thing I like is that Patreon's description of hate speech is actually more detailed than YouTube's is. I'll show it to you so you get a sense of where I'm coming from with this. Patreon connects creators to their patrons all over the world. We are a global platform built on promoting creativity, which makes us a very inclusive group. Therefore, there is no room on Patreon for hate speech, such as calling for violence, exclusion, or segregation. Hate speech includes serious attacks or even negative generalizations of people based on their race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, or serious medical conditions. When reviewing an account for potential hate speech violation, we consider some of the following questions. Does the content have historical or educational value? For example, we don't allow the use of swastika for propaganda promoting hate, but it would be acceptable to use it as an educational video to talk about Germany under the Third Reich. Is there a call for violence against a protected class? Does the creator glorify a group that is known to support ideologies that would be classified as hate speech under this policy? And is the creator using racial slurs or negative depictions of a protected class? This list is not exhaustive, but we want to be transparent about how we work in the gray areas between speech and action. There can be a fine line between political comments and hate speech. And then they recommend people report it if they find it. Now, some people may be going, wow, that's a huge leap from, do you promote violence? Are you creating propaganda? And racial slurs are negative depictions of protected class. And this is where hate speech becomes a somewhat controversial topic. Now, I want to make some things perfectly clear here. This is not, because it's not a government service, because this is a for-profit business that exists to create a funding platform for content creators. This is not a question of freedom of speech. This, and don't freak out, hear me out. This is a terms of service issue. We have to agree to terms of service when we use these platforms. I don't agree with certain rules on Patreon, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. But if I deliberately and knowingly violate those terms of service, then I can expect to be booted off that service. And if you want to do it as an act of protest, that is your choice. That is absolutely your choice. But these companies are private entities. And I say this having defended Gab in the past that Patreon cut off. Gab is going to have a real challenge when it comes to funding. But Gab has made a choice about what they want to do. They accept the consequences for doing that for now. Patreon has the right to set rules that they can defend. Because, if it's in America, there's, huge sweeping free speech protections for Americans. In other countries, the country I live in, Canada included, we do not have as wide-ranging free speech protections. We do have hate speech laws. The UK has hate speech laws. So, Patreon has to take a global view of what kind of trouble they're going to get into with their service. So they have the right to set content rules. Now, and this is where we get into the short-term versus long-term stuff. Some people who dropped their support from me said they'd be happy to support me if I went over to Subscribestar. Well, I went over to Subscribestar, and when you go to Subscribestar, there's like this landing page, and it says, here are our stars. And it's like a bunch of right-wing people and Naomi Wu. There's some personalities I don't recognize, but the personalities I do recognize are definitely not even right wing. Here's the page. I pulled it up. I should have got it pulled up before this, but I didn't think. You go to Subscribestar, independent crowdfunding platform, and you go down here, meet the stars, right wing. Like, there's a clear, I hate saying extreme right, because to me, extreme right is an economic position. People argued with me on Twitter on that, but I do not believe the Subscribestar is a right-wing or alt-right-wing platform. I do believe someone could use that graphic to smear someone as, alt-right because of the Breitbart and other associations. And this is a short-term problem for me for reasons involving ongoing litigation that I can't get into publicly. I'm going to give the patrons more information so that they know. But I'm not being sued. It's not that. I'm not suing anybody. I'm not being sued. Unfortunately, I, have some evidence that is relevant or potentially relevant to the case So I had to, at my own expense, produce an affidavit and send it in. And I can't do anything right now where someone could smear me as alt-right again. That is something I have been struggling with for quite a while. People dismissing me as alt-right sympathetic, and it's ridiculous just based on the discussion I had about, trans people. Any of my content, it's not even close to alt-right, but that doesn't matter. It's what people can make stick. And, a savage litigator, if they find certain things like, look, she's on this site and she's on this and she's on this, she's sympathetic to the alt-right, that could be damaging to the testimony I'm providing. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So in the short term, unfortunately, Subscribestar is just not an option. I really struggled with that because that is a perception thing instead of a what is real thing. And you guys know I don't play that way. So I went back to the idea of, do I actually think Patreon did anything wrong here? It's a pretty cut and dried, it's a pretty cut and dried issue of if they, since they do say in their community guidelines, racial slurs or negative depictions of a protected class are violations of their hate speech terms of service. I am sympathetic towards Sargon, but he says some reckless things that could definitely be interpreted in that way. I don't think he intends them as hateful. I think he's got a lot of learning to do about the impact words have on people who identify with certain groups. I mean, the one that really stung me was people saying he was trolling people with Rothschild and George Soros things, which are, a lot of people don't know those internet things have, those conspiracy theories have roots in anti-Semitism. And I was taken aback. And what happens when you see someone make comments like that, you wonder if you really know them. You wonder what they're really thinking about you. And those conspiracy theories do have impact. They're not harmless. I mean, George Soros getting mailed a bomb aside, that was an insane person. But this idea Jews control the media, there's some sort of Jewish conspiracy in banking, it makes Jews out to be a privileged minority. And so what ends up happening is it's harder for us to actually get, say, the right to not work Saturdays, or to be able to say, hey, you're supposed to be an inclusive workplace, so can you not have bacon cheeseburgers in your catered lunch with no other options, please? That's, bacon cheeseburgers are about the trafest. Trafe means like unkosher, because it's got meat and cheese together and then bacon on top of it. That's like unkoshering unkosher. And it's amazing how many industry events I have been to where E3 was terrible for this. It was all, catered sandwiches, pre-made sandwiches. And so they'd be ham and cheese and turkey and cheese and everything's cheese, because Americans love cheese. And hey, I like cheese, but I don't eat it with meat. And so you try to pick it out, but really you're not supposed to do that. And, these are sorts of things of, well, nobody really keeps kosher, and oh, come on. And people make all these excuses, but the reality is that isn't an inclusive practice. And then you have to make a choice because a lot of the venues kind of frown on you bringing in your own food, and they search bags and stuff like that. So I used to carry one of those, those metal water bottles, and I used to put like energy drink type stuff in them just to get me through the day, because there was no freaking food. And so it's things like that. It does cause harm. I mean, obviously racial slurs cause real emotional stress for people, but it's connected to, and in England, it's not as well understood as in America. I admit, I've had some British relatives, and they get really drunk, and some of the stuff that comes out of their mouths is like, oh Lord, like the Manchester is coming out. There is, I'm not going to repeat the words I heard from people I respect very much, but you could see the shock even at the memory. There was a nationalism in England that goes back to the fact that they were like, we don't have similar in our history in North America, because we weren't a bombing site other than Pearl Harbor for the Second World War. Britain was. And so there's this nationalism where they were allowed to hate the enemy, completely dehumanize the enemy. And older people I know who lived through that, they're like, why can't I hate, certain people? We're at war with them. It's like, yeah, that was the war effort back then. I studied the propaganda. I saw how it worked. But it's still, people who have lived their entire lives in England don't have the same understanding of the unique sensitivity in America surrounding not just Black people and race, but Asian people and race as well. Keep in mind that the early Chinese immigrants were basically indentured servants building the railroad. So, things did not get off to a great start. And then, we have a lot of Afro-Caribbean, West Indian, we call it West Indian up here, immigrants up here. And there are histories there. And it's because people in Europe are more removed from this stuff. A lot of people do not understand the tensions, even within Canada. Because if you live in a major city like Toronto, for instance, you may not deal with Canada's Indigenous population on a regular basis. So they don't understand the issues. And I understand that people can say things that deeply hurt, and they don't realize that they're being hurtful or why it's hurtful. And it's just words, no big deal. And I know Sargon does feel legitimately bad, and he is willing to apologize if he hurts people. And that's why I gotta be careful that I don't let that bias my opinion of this outcome, because I know he's not the caricature that some in the media make him out to be. I cannot deny that he says many reckless and insensitive things. That is not the same as saying he is a bad person. That is saying that particular fault or personality quirk in this day and age can run you into trouble with any service that has an anti-hate speech terms of service. And so I really can't. Patreon didn't change their rules to get rid of them. These rules were not recently changed, period. We cannot deny that he has said certain things. And the argument I've heard is, well, they weren't on his channel. For the purposes of Patreon or his YouTube channel, that I think would be relevant to YouTube. But Patreon, yes, you can put videos up on Patreon. But that's not how Patreon works. Patreon gives you money for the stuff you do on other platforms. So unfortunately, I don't think that's relevant to the decision they made. And the crappy thing about these terms of service stuff is that not everybody gets caught. You only get caught if someone reports you. You never know who actually reported you. And, you know, I had my Facebook account locked because I was using the name Leanna K on Facebook, which is a name I use for work. I've used it for work for years, but Facebook decided, no, you have to use your real full legal name. Fine, whatever. I wasn't happy about it, but I preferred to not use my legal name for work because if somebody contacted me and they called me Leanna K, it's like, okay, this is someone who doesn't know me personally. Because, you know, privately, like on my producing stuff, I use Leanna Kirsner. For my on-air stuff, I use Leanna K. And that was a quick way to know which Leanna they were contacting me about, which really does matter in terms of expectations from the person I'm dealing with. But I had to do it. It's otherwise, you know, quit Facebook. I think that YouTube's standards and practices are downright Puritan regarding comedy and what women can do with our bodies. I do think it's a huge double standard that men can be shirtless and women can't. But I have to abide by those standards. And the reality is that, and I do think that we can reasonably expect someone to know that certain racial slurs and slurs about people's sexuality are considered extremely offensive. Now, is there a huge social quadruple standard regarding those sorts of things, right? Gay slurs are considered unacceptable, but women keep getting called sluts and thoughts and all that stuff, which it's still attacking someone for their sexuality. Yes, that's a double standard. You know, you can't use racial slurs, but people can drop the word bitch. That is a double standard. Patreon didn't create that double standard, but yes, we absolutely have social double standards. And this is something we have to collectively confront together. And some of the, people in Europe, certain words are a lot worse than Europe than they are here, and certain words are really bad here, whereas they're not that bad in Europe. Entertainment becoming truly globalized. There are some growing pains with it, and that sucks. But, you know, in this case, some of the words Sargon used in public contexts, and that's very important. It's not like somebody leaked a private conversation. These were, maybe it wasn't on his channel, but they were discussions designed to be held in public. He did violate that term of service. So I really can't be mad at Patreon as much as I really feel for Sargon. And this may sound completely counterintuitive, but I really don't think he meant anything awful by it. But that doesn't mean that words don't hurt even unintentionally. And so that is why I'm sticking with Patreon, even though it's not perfect. And even though I know some people don't like it. Now, in the long term, once this litigation is concluded, I don't know. I'm with Subscribestar. I'm really hesitant just because of how badly I got burned in the past to get involved with anything that has even remotely a whiff of that kind of stuff. So what I'm trying to do is figure out how to do more merchandising in 2019 for people who don't want to do Patreon, but do want to do, maybe we can do a loot box style thing where people can purchase merchandise and get it shipped out. You know, maybe that's a way of doing it so people don't have to use Patreon because they don't like it. They can still support me, and I don't have to get into a particular political minefield. That's the only thing I can figure out for people who have chosen to drop their Patreon support, because of this. Now, that is going to take time. And in the short term, I am taking a financial hit because of this. And that's part of the reason I had to re-record this a million times, is because I was really angry and kind of freaked out about that. And so I needed to calm down and sort of look at this from a lens of something other than anger and fear, and actually be like kind of rational and logical about this. And it is completely understandable, and I completely get why another completely rational, not hateful person would come to a completely different conclusion about the facts and evidence. That's, people have different opinions for a reason, right? All I can say is this is what is the best of a very bad set of options for me right now. It feels, I admit, it feels really, really unfair that I took a hit of a few $100 a month for something I did nothing wrong. I was not involved. It was an issue unrelated to my content. People got mad at the format. And I am a bit ticked that Patreon didn't issue its own statement. I think these services should be transparent when they ban someone, overtly transparent, and not just give a quote to Vice, because Vice twists things for their own political purposes, right? So I'm not pleased about that. But while I think there's room for improvement on Patreon, like I said, I don't think they did anything actively wrong. And I hope you guys understand that. I hope you see that it is a principled stance. Even if you don't agree with it. Like I said, this has nothing to do with my opinions on free speech. Like I said, I defended Gab for what it is. I just recognize from a purely cynical, this is the world we live in stance, that this is not a freedom of speech issue. This is a terms of service issue. I don't like it, but these are the rules we all have to abide by. So that's where I am. Sorry this was so long. I wanted to get another Feedback Friday stuff other than this, because people were really cool about those comments, and I wanted to thank people for that. So this was actually 2 videos in one, but next week we're going to get back to, oh God, I can't even say it's more fun, because there's a bunch of crazy stories launching right now about various games and game franchises and personalities, and I hate drama. I hate covering drama, but you guys have asked me to cover certain things that I consider drama, and I listen to you. So have a good weekend. I will be moving. My big move is next Tuesday. So I don't know what's going to happen, because obviously I have to transfer internet service from one to the other, and I'm at my data cap for the month. I've been getting data warnings on my mobile, so they don't tend to let you upload videos on Wi-Fi hotspots in coffee shops, so I will try to have minimal disruptions, but yeah, next week is going to be TBA. Thanks for watching.